It's such an honor to be up here to honor Sharon and the relationship she has with all of us, and to be here as a partner in this conversation with three extraordinary leaders. So I have some questions.
Okay. Shall we climb up?
Great. Good. So can each of you share with us how you met Sharon and how that started your relationship with her?
Yes. This is on? Excellent. I have to say, these stools are challenging for short people. Sharon, you have to do something about this for next time. Thank you. Thank you, Jed, and it is such a true honor and incredible joy to be here tonight honoring Sharon. I met Sharon also 25 years ago. It was my senior year at Yale. It was 1993, and Sharon had just been hired at Yale Hillel. I was someone who got involved in Hillel from practically my first step on campus, and had become close with Rabbi Jim Ponette, who's here tonight, along with his wife Ilana, and didn't feel like I was looking for another rabbi. That is, until pretty much immediately after I first met Sharon and knew that I needed and wanted exactly this rabbi in my life. Anyone else in the room have that experience with Sharon? So I particularly connected with Sharon when she was unequivocally supportive of me when I came out in the fall of my senior year. I have a very vivid memory of sitting on the old campus green, kind of pulling out tufts of grass nervously and telling Sharon in a trembling voice that I identified as bisexual, and telling her how hard it was for the first time in my 3+ years at Yale not to feel at home in the Jewish community, and how uncomfortable it felt to walk into the kosher kitchen with my girlfriend and feel everyone looking at us, and how painful the silence and the absolute absence of any LGBTQ reality was within the Jewish community. And without missing a beat, Sharon pledged her support of me. She pledged her support of me as I continued to come out in the Jewish community, and she pledged Hillel's support of me if I decided to try to plan some kind of programming for what we then called the LGB organization on campus and the Jewish community. And it may seem like a given today that a Hillel rabbi would respond that way, a Reconstructionist Hillel rabbi at that, but it was not a given at all in 1993. In fact, we all expected the opposite. In fact, I was the first Hillel leader at Yale to come out, and no one else came out that year. Many people did come out to me privately and said that they wished they could come out, and said that they were blown away to hear about Sharon's support, but they were afraid to come out. So that was the reality then. Sharon was a part of changing that. I can't emphasize enough the world of difference that moment made for me and how that transformed my sense of what was possible. I didn't then dream of one day becoming a professional gay Jew, certainly, nor was that career path ever offered to me at Yale University. However, when I look back, I can really draw a direct link between the moment that Sharon became my rabbi and me becoming the leader I am today.
Thank you. Angela?
So Idit and I were classmates at Yale together. We were first on Bronfman together when we were 16 years old. And so we met Sharon at the same time, also 25 years ago. And I'm going to begin with a confession, because I got to Yale, I called myself post-feminist, I think. And it was because, I was raised to feel like I could do anything that boys could do. I'd been like the president of my student body. And, the first female rabbi was ordained the year that I was born. So I kind of felt like the work of the feminist movement was done when I was 18. And boy, was I wrong, but I felt kind of comfortable in that. And I had all these great rabbinic role models both from Bronfman, from my home synagogue, Rabbi Ponette also, and did not know how much having Sharon come on campus would turn my head around about what rabbinic leadership looked like. And she started these Rosh Chodesh groups for women. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, why do we need that? But I came because I love Sharon. And it was a revelation to see how it looked when we studied text from a women's perspective, and with that commentary. She brought the first women's Seder to us, and that was wildly successful, and we were all sitting on the floor together and with our orange on the Seder plate, which was radical at the time. And it was the way that she showed a very different kind of power and a different kind of interaction with the text. And it changed completely for me the way I saw what it meant to have rabbinic leadership. And so that has affected the way I am as a rabbi today, and I've been extremely grateful, and it continues to inform the way I think about things.
So I share with my colleagues gratitude and honor to be here to honor you, Sharon, and your leadership, and especially in a room of people where it feels like you could have picked 3 names out of a hat to come up here and talk. So I don't know what it was about 1993, but Sharon and I also met in 1993. That was my summer on the Bronfman Youth Fellowships, and I think it was Sharon's first summer teaching on the Bronfman Youth Fellowship, which didn't show. It seemed like you knew what was going on and what was happening. I think you were also a newlywed that summer. I remember Shabbat dinner in your home. One of the things that was so striking to me about that experience, meeting Sharon and also finding, unlike the way you mentioned it, Idit, it wasn't that I had a rabbi and didn't think I was looking for a rabbi. I was in a modern Orthodox community. I already knew I didn't really need a rabbi or want one. And I really still to this day would, if asked and pushed, who is my rabbi, it would be Sharon. Discovering in a rabbi and in a person someone who up until that point in terms of my upbringing, I would not have known existed as a rabbi in the world. Certainly not with the demeanor and presence and approach to Torah that Sharon represented in the rabbinate. So you transformed the image for me of what a rabbi was supposed to look like, and also the nature of what authority in a rabbi was supposed to look like. And I'll give one example. We'll talk more about this, but I'll give one example, which was, I remember some intense conversations which were very significant when I was 16 about women and Birkat HaMazon, the grace after meals. But what was powerful about our conversations then, which stuck with me, was not that you were challenging me as a teacher with your perspective that I was meant to absorb. You were challenging me to become accountable to the things that I already said I believed in. And that is a mode of teaching and modeling authority that is really transformational in the rabbinate.
So can you each share how Sharon continues to inspire your leadership?
So as someone who, like Sharon, also has a quieter presence, I've always appreciated Sharon's leadership. I've always appreciated how Sharon demonstrates so powerfully how leadership is not about brash self-assurance or a dominating presence, or competing for who can be the most entertaining in the room, which are definitely patterns that we see in the Jewish community and in the broader world. Sharon shows how powerful leadership can come from gentleness, and powerful leadership can come from humility, and powerful leadership can be about connections and relationship. I was reminded by another rabbi of mine. I'm blessed to have many rabbis in my life, Rabbi Toba Spitzer. People joked at my wedding that, the wedding was overpopulated with rabbis, but probably some other people here in the room had the same experience at their weddings. So I was reminded by Rabbi Toba Spitzer of the frequent twinning of the concepts of Chesed and Emet, and was thinking earlier today about how Sharon is someone who really always acts with chesed, with love, and in doing so also infuses that with emet, with truth. And she is also someone who leads with truth, who speaks emet, who speaks truth, and does so with chesed, with love.
Well, you're going to hear, I think, themes, but I would say that when I had a model of the rabbinate, it was a kind of a loud charisma and a kind of competitive banter and a kind of rising in the spotlight that somehow drew more light to you. And with Sharon, there was a way that she took that light and somehow reflected it back on everyone. I had the privilege of leading high holiday services with Sharon, and just the collaboration of working on the service, which was so different than working with anyone else before, and that she took me seriously as a student, a 21-year-old student, and her sermons were so powerful and profound. But more than that, all I could say is describe it now, is that on the bima, she had spiritual gravitas. And I use that word very deliberately because gravitas is usually code for 60-year-old man. And it really is. And usually when people want to say that women can't really lead, they say, she's great, she just doesn't have the gravitas. Well, I point to Sharon Cohen Anisfeld. There is no one with more spiritual gravitas. And she also taught me about what it meant to teach a text that was not about showing everyone how much you know, but helping people figure out how much you can figure out about yourself and your own humanity, and how that might unpack something and open up your heart in a different way. All of these things were revelations. I had the privilege of being a part of Sharon's installation when she was dean. I'm going to guess many of you were in the room more than about, 12 years ago when she became the dean of Hebrew College. And I just marveled to look at this woman who was taking one of the highest positions in Jewish academia, and she did it without sacrificing 1 ounce of her authentic self. And I thought to myself before, when I thought about the model of the rabbi I would be, there was still a niggling little part of me that's like, but I'm never going to be really authentic because I'm not going to look like those other rabbis. And she not only gave me a model, but she embodied what it was to retain your true sense as a woman and as a mother and as a leader, and to do that with such power.
I want to talk about a value that you're going to laugh when I say this, about this value that I've learned from you and with you over many years in conversation, which is the value of ambivalence. We've talked about that a lot, and oftentimes ambivalence, especially in our contemporary political culture, and certainly in association with many religious communities, ambivalence is viewed as a characteristic of weakness, and it is used as a contrast to the power of certainty. It correlates to some of the pieces you were talking about with gravitas, and religious traditions actually do this to spiritual leaders. The proximity to talking about God makes people feel that God teaches them that they're closer to God, that they're supposed to embody those parts of God that are about certainty. When you talk with all of your students, there's pausing. And that pausing, whether it's to think, whether it's to absorb what we've said, but I want to put it not just as a discipline or a spiritual practice, but actually as a moral value that suggests to us that our relationship to truth is one that being a religious person is supposed to cultivate in us a relationship to truth that's actually rooted in uncertainty. That represents a paradigm for the religious individual that is much more godlike than the godlike of certainty. In some ways, and pluralism got mentioned, and it'll get mentioned again. There too, pluralism is this word that gets tossed around to mean getting along with people. But when pluralism is actually about representing a deep epistemological humility about what you know and what you don't, and then also some measure of sincerity and conviction about what you will stand for in relationship to that epistemological humility, it becomes a religious value that is much more transcendent than that of certainty.
So, final round of questions. What is a moment, a time, or a text that you shared with Sharon shared with you that continues to stay with you, inspire you? Start with Idit.
So I would say this is less about the text and more about the impact of the moment. That's okay. So several years ago, I mean, actually probably like 15 years ago, Sharon and I co-taught a text study about Purim and the story of Esther as a quintessential coming out story at a reunion of the Bronfman Youth Fellowships in Israel, which, as Angela said, I went on when I was 16, but before Sharon was a faculty member. And when Angela and I were on the Bronfman Youth Fellowships together, it was very common for fellows in our group to say homophobic slurs and make homophobic jokes, and I think the faculty also participated in some of the joking. They certainly never interrupted, never responded to any of that kind of language or joking, and certainly never said anything positive. And for the two kids in my group who were actively struggling with their identities as young gay men at the time, I was happily heterosexual, so I wasn't in that struggle. But for the two of them, they talk about all of those very painful moments, and and how they saw that Jewish community was another Jewish community that could not be a home for them. So several years later, with Sharon co-teaching that text, and afterward, and I don't know if I ever shared this with you, Sharon, so I'm glad to have the opportunity to do so tonight. I must have gotten a couple dozen emails from Bronfman alums who came out to me and talked about how they never felt safe being out on their Bronfman summers, but how that was starting to change, and that was starting to change because of you. And I know that today, because of Sharon, the Bronfman Youth Fellowships is a Jewish community for many LGBTQ young people, which is the first community, Jewish or otherwise, in their lives where they feel embraced.
I'm just going to talk for a moment about that Women's Seder, because it was a transformative experience for me. I would say I started out as like the wicked daughter who asked, like, why do you have to keep inserting these questions into the text? And then when I was actually a part of the experience, it was really one of those moments of like, she really raised my feminist consciousness. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, why are all these stories completely missing from our retelling? And why is it that it's true that most of the women are still more often in the kitchen than leading a Seder? And many of those other questions that finally, for the first time, were kind of percolating in my post-feminist self. And then, of course, this consciousness, she did this, though, without being at all kind of the angry feminist. She did this in her powerful way where she was making revolution happen without having to make a lot of noise and sound, just doing it. And as I grew older and got married and had children, and then also tried to apply for a job for the first time when I was applying for the senior rabbi job that was always held by men. Well, my consciousness got raised quite a bit more. And I would say, and then with the Me Too movement, and with Kavanaugh, we won't get into it, I am now a bra-burning, card-carrying feminist. And I feel like, and I found my anger, which took a while, but I finally found my anger. But I'm thinking to myself, and I still do, what would Sharon do? And Sharon wouldn't just get out there and start yelling or just protesting just to be in the front. She would be making that quiet revolution happening, and part of the way she would do it is she's just going to get that job and do it better than everybody else. And that's the best revenge. So, Sharon, thank you.
So a lot of the Torah, a lot of the texts that I've learned with Sharon over the years have been either about Israel or in Israel, and oftentimes both, about Israel and in Israel. That summer on Bronfman, I still remember the text that we learned together in the Hebrew poetry class, which I know has been a core commitment as your intellectual project, really studying the poets of modern Israel and the ways in which they are sometimes our scholars and sages, and sometimes our prophets, sometimes of doom and sometimes of joy. And I remember studying Amichai and especially Dan Pagis together with you those summers in Jerusalem. What's striking to me about it now is not just the texts, but what was what was the implied and in some ways explicit curriculum of what it was to study Israeli poetry in Israel together with you. So much of how our communities construct a relationship to Zionism in the State of Israel is through prisms of cultivating loyalty, in spite of the fact that what made the Zionist project so enchanting and so compelling for so much of our history was that it was a project of imagination and curiosity and complexity and dreaming. And I know many of your students, when they study poetry with you in Israel or about Israel, find a meaningful entry point into a story that oftentimes feels hopelessly political and endlessly boundaried. And the thrill of being able to actually live lives of imagination together with the poets of Israel and for the Jewish people is a piece of Torah that it's hard to think our community could be in more need of than we are today.
Great. Thank you all so much. Sharon, I want to invite you to take in this moment and let it continue to inspire you. You've just heard from 3 extraordinary students, and I just took some notes along the way. Some of the things they shared. Sharon opens our hearts. She takes light and reflects it back onto everyone. Powerful and profound, spiritual gravitas. Feminist consciousness becomes a feminist role model. Support change, transforming or transformational 6 or 7 times in this conversation. Sharon is a revelation. Who is my rabbi? Sharon. Chesed and emet. Powerful leadership from gentleness and humility, quiet presence but intensely challenging, poetically imaginative, sees ambivalence, nuance, makes us feel embraced. WWSD, what would Sharon do? Get that job and do it better than anyone else. And I think we're going to see that. We've seen that and we will continue to see it. So you've heard from these 3 proteges who are now in turn leaders and role models and mentors to an entirely new generation of Jewish leaders, Lador Vador. And so what I think they shared with us is how you bring hope, strength, inclusion, and inspiration. And in this moment, in this world, there's nothing we need more than hope, strength, inclusion, and inspiration. And this institution of Hebrew College uniquely embodies hope, strength, inclusion, and inspiration. And I can't think of a better person to lead that organization with hope, strength, inclusion, and inspiration. So for all of us here and for Hebrew College, thank you as a leader for giving us all hope, strength, inclusion, and inspiration.